The Chicago Bears have tried a bunch of different things to improve their non-existent pass rush, and so far, none of it's working. And the problem is, it's making the rest of the defense look worse as a result.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and hopefully every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. On the show today, we take a closer look at this Chicago Bears pass rushing problems, highlighted perhaps most strongly by what happened and really didn't happen against the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday. We'll kind of go through that game plan from a pass rush standpoint, and then look at some of the things they've been trying up to this point, both from a scheme perspective and a personnel perspective. And I'm left kind of feeling like they've tried everything I can think of, and I'm not sure that there's really a solution left other than pulling something out of thin air or getting players to randomly play better than we've seen them play up to this point. Because it really, I think, came to a head against the Falcons. You saw some pretty overall pathetic pass rush from the Chicago Bears, at least specifically from the defensive line. The Bears had to opt to a heavier blitzing scheme and play calling again in this game because they're not getting any sort of consistent pass rush from their four-down defensive linemen. That when you look at Pro Football Focus is pressure stats. Anytime a pass rusher, either hurries a quarterback, hits a quarterback, or of course sacks the quarterback. Those are all under this umbrella of pressures. Across the entire Chicago Bears defensive line, there was one pressure by one player on one play in the entire game. In terms of total number of passing plays, I think that ended up being about 26 passing plays. The Bears defensive line individually generated one pressure on Marcus Mariota. And it was not the name, I don't know which name you might think at first is, but it's not going to be in the first 3 or 4 names you're going to come up with. The one Bears defensive lineman that generated pressure on Marcus Mariota was Mike Pennell, the backup defensive tackle. That means 0 pressures from Dominique Robinson, 0 pressures from Al-Quadin Muhammad, 0 pressures from Travis Gibson, who did leave momentarily with an injury in that game, 0 pressures from Justin Jones. Now, it's also worth noting the Bears got 5 pressures from a combination of Jack Sanborn, Jaquan Brisker, and Kyler Gordon, all getting after the quarterback on blitzes. But that's not been a sustainable formula for the Chicago Bears, and the blitzes by themselves have not been good enough to generate a consistent enough pressure to disrupt opposing quarterbacks. So as a whole, Marcus Mariota was under pressure on 7 passing plays out of the 24 dropbacks he had in this game. He was 3 of 5 for 31 yards on those plays. The Bears blitzed him 11 times. So not even all 11 of the blitzes were generating pressure when they do get that pressure. And if they're consistently relying on those linebackers, safeties, and cornerbacks to get the pass rush on the quarterback, that's another player that you're taking out of coverage on the back end. And when those blitzes don't get home, all of a sudden, that's when it's a little easier to find those open receivers downfield because there's fewer players to cover all the wide receivers and pass catchers that the offense is sending out there. Now, specific to this Bears-Falcons game, Atlanta kept in, I thought, a surprising number of tight ends and running backs in pass protection, going back through the All-22 film. I wondered if the lack of pass rush would just be like heavy play action and moving pockets, and they did some of that, but not nearly as much as you might have thought, but they did leave in tight ends and running backs to give them extra blockers in there that were able to pick up those Bears blitzes. We still saw, a couple of times they got to Marcus Mariota, but it really wasn't much of a pass rush effort as a whole, and that's why the Falcons were able to move the ball fairly effectively and outscore the Chicago Bears in this game. And it's a longer trend that we've seen from this Bears defense just not being able to generate a pass rush. They're at the bottom of the NFL in terms of pass rushing productivity, pressures, hits, etc. Getting after the quarterback has been a huge struggle for this group. It was a struggle before they traded away Robert Quinn, and you can imagine trading away Robert Quinn makes it that much more difficult. The one thing we saw them do differently in this game against the Falcons was sit back more in zone coverage with their blitzing, as opposed to last week's game against the Detroit Lions, where they went for much more of a man coverage heavy style of blitzing. But you're still taking defenders out of coverage and asking then the remaining defenders to cover usually larger areas of the field in zone, or certainly have less help in one-on-one man-to-man coverage. And it's why you've seen this Bears defense in particular struggle. And so there's not really a super obvious answer here, because as we kind of dive into this a little bit deeper, we'll find that the Bears have tried a lot of different things from a scheme standpoint, blitzing and trying to generate pass rush in a variety of different ways, and none of it seems to be a consistent, effective strategy for them. They've tried a number of different things in terms of personnel, rotating who's going to play and where they're going to play, and adding players from outside of the organization and players still in the organization. I mean, it's really been a smorgasbord of throwing whatever they can against the wall and trying to get some sort of pass rush to stick, and it just hasn't happened yet. And I think as a result, it makes Kyler Gordon look worse in coverage. It makes Jaquan Brisker look worse in coverage. It makes Kindle Vildor look worse in coverage, because these quarterbacks are having too much time to sit in there and scan the field and find open receivers and keep their offenses moving. And that's in addition to some of the struggles the Bears have had from their defensive line in run defense as well. I think it's going to be a very, very high priority for Ryan Poles this offseason, as will offensive line. But I think it's going to end up being a fairly trench-heavy focus in free agency and the NFL draft. But let's take a closer look at what the coaching staff has done in terms of play calling and scheme and dressing things up to try and get some pass rushing going next on Locked On Bears. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. BetterHelp is here to aid in your mental health care, because seeking therapy with our friends at BetterHelp is super easy, and it's a really important part of the process. I do online therapy once a week, just like BetterHelp, and it's really an important part of me staying at my best. Just like you take care of your body by going to the gym, taking care of your mind by going to therapy is really, really important, and BetterHelp is here to help. Whether or not you've been in therapy personally, it's really a good time to get going. Whether you've done it before and not found the right fit, or you haven't done before but thinking about trying it, BetterHelp is here to make it really easy, because it's all online. They've got a bunch of great therapists, and they'll match you with one to be the right fit for you. And if it's not the right fit for you, they make it really easy to transfer and find a new one until you find the right person that you can click with. There's no waiting room, there's no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist, all with our friends at BetterHelp. So get unstuck with BetterHelp. You can learn more and save 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. This Bears defense is going to need some better help for its pass rush. And my first thought is always like, okay, well, what can the coaching staff do differently? Is there more they can do to get this Bears pass rush going? And as I sort of took a closer look and going back through some games too, you just sort of see they've sprinkled in a variety of everything that comes to mind right away of like, okay, what can you do to help this pass rush? For a while early on in the season, it was very much conservative defensive play calling in terms of we're going to rush four, we're going to drop guys back in mostly zone coverage and kind of sit there and put that shell over top and, let your four-man rush try and work up front. And we didn't really see, a ton of great pass rush as a result. We saw them occasionally mix in more blitzes by game plan in certain specific opponents. I think Houston Texans game was one of them in particular, where they went a little bit more man coverage and blitz heavy and then kind of went back to the four-man rush. And it wasn't really getting a whole lot of success. And then especially, you take Robert Quinn out of the occasion and, you're really struggling with that group as a four-man rush. So I think after a couple of games post Robert Quinn, you see defensive coordinator Alan Williams clearly make some level of scheme adjustment there. I think it started right around, week. They ended up doing it against the Dolphins in week 9. We've especially seen it the last 2 games in terms of what the Bears have done from a blitzing perspective. Because you weren't going to blitz Tua Tagovailoa exactly and try and have your guys have even fewer guys in coverage to cover Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but especially against the Lions and Falcons, where you feel like maybe it's not a wide receiving core that you're as worried about as compared to like the Cowboys and Dolphins right after the Robert Quinn trade. It was a little bit more palatable for them, but you saw them do it 2 different ways. Like we said, against Detroit, the Bears were running man coverage on like over 50% of their plays, which is super, super high. The Bears for most of the season were down around 20 to 25% man coverage for them. And, so then against the Lions, they go up to like 50, 60% man coverage and blitz on almost half of the Bears defensive or pass coverage snaps, had an extra pass rusher coming after Jared Goff. And they said, we're going to, most of the time there was still Eddie Jackson as a deep safety there, but it's pretty much man coverage for all your cornerbacks and your linebackers in that role. And at times there was effective. I mean, Jack Sanborn got to Jared Goff a couple of times, but overall there were still too many of those plays where Goff was able to find largely Amon-Ra St. Brown getting behind the coverage on the back end, a lot of play action playing into some of that game. And then the Falcons, Bears said, this man coverage stuff, we don't have the horses, especially at cornerback. Like you have Jalen Johnson can do it, but the likes of Jalen Jones and Kindle Vildor and with Kyler Gordon's struggles this season, I don't think they were quite able to trust those guys to sit back in man coverage all game against, a Kyle Pitts and a Drake London type. So they said, screw it. We're going to sit more in zone, more cover 3 blitzes where you go like 3 deep safeties and 3 underneath defenders. So you only have 6 back in coverage and send in that 5th rusher in there, or sometimes, a 2-4 kind of thing. And again, when the rushers weren't getting home, there weren't enough guys on the field to create, to cover all the different spaces where a lot of those intermediate areas of the field that defenders were sneaking in there. And it was like, all right, you've tried man blitzing, you've tried zone blitzing, and even in that zone blitzing that we saw against the Falcons, there were a couple of plays where they started dropping the defensive ends back into pass coverage to say, okay, we're going to blitz. I think that one was Gordon and Sanborn pass rushed, and you saw Travis Gibson and Dominique Robinson drop back into underneath zone coverage just to try and get some pass rush coming from some different areas and still have bodies back in coverage. The idea being that the blitz gets home, so you don't have to ask Robinson or Gibson to stay very long in coverage. They're just supposed to take away quick routes and not actually cover anybody downfield. But of course, it gets picked up by a running back. And I remember the one specific play, I'm thinking of Mariota had time and threw in a pass. So it's like they're trying a lot of different things. They're blitzing guys from different positions. Right? Early on, we saw, early in the season, they'd blitz Brisker here and there and occasionally Roquan Smith, but it wasn't really much else beyond that. And now you're seeing Kyler Gordon blitz, you're seeing Eddie Jackson blitz, Jack Sanborn, Nick Morrow, pretty much everybody but Jalen Johnson has been a blitzer at times for the Chicago Bears in the last couple of games. They've kind of said, no, Jalen Johnson is a little bit too valuable for this defense to be taking him out of coverage. And they certainly don't do it much with Eddie Jackson, but sometimes when he's down and around near the line of scrimmage, they even blitzed DeAndre Houston Carson in this last game as well. So like they're trying different guys coming from different angles and be different blitzes. So it's not like the same 3 blitzes they're running all game to where offensive lines can just say, okay, here comes the blitz. Let's pick it up because we know exactly where it's coming from there. And so I'm kind of left wondering, like what else can you do? You can't blitz every time. I think among the league leaders in blitzing, the Giants with Wink Martindale, formerly the Ravens defensive coordinator, they blitzed this season between like 50 to 60% of their passing plays. They're sending extra pass rushers. That's really the high end of the NFL. The Bears blitzed about 45% against Atlanta and 50% against Detroit. So they're like approaching Giants level of heavy blitzing over these last couple of games, and it's not working. Bears are running plenty of stunts, at least anecdotally that I can see. They're having guys exchange pass rush lanes fairly often. I don't have numbers on like where they rank in terms of that rate, but you're not watching there saying, oh, they're just doing the same 4 rush lanes over and over again. There is some variety on that. They line up with what are called boss fronts. It's an acronym, big on same side. You'll see them put 3 defensive linemen on the left side of the center and 1 defensive lineman on the right side of the center. So you're intentionally overloading the offensive line so that the offensive line will have to then shift its protection to that heavier side with 3 defensive linemen. The linemen are going to shift that way. So then if you know the linemen are going to shift that way, you can bring blitz on the other side where they're shifting away from, or you can stunt to that other side away from where the shift is, right? Like things that, smart defensive coordinators will do to get the pass rush going. You've seen them walk Nick Morrow down or Jack Sanborn down to the line of scrimmage like an edge rusher, outside linebacker at times. You've seen them kick Dominique Robinson or Al-Quadin Muhammad into defensive tackle in those 3 defensive end packages in pass rushing situations. Like these are all the things that okay, are they doing this? Like you check down the list of ideas to get the pass rush going schematically. And it's with the guys that they have, it doesn't seem to matter what they try. They just don't have pass rushing talent. Which begs the question, can they do something personnel-wise? Can they get different players involved? If you can't scheme up this pass rush, you're just going to need more talent. Is there anything they can do? We'll kind of look at how they've changed the usage of the players that they have and look at a couple of names outside of the organization, including a new face or 2 that they just recently brought in that maybe use a little bit more. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. You just add your job on LinkedIn and you can use their simple tools like screening questions that make it really easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So we know the Bears have been trying everything they can, it seems, in terms of scheme to get this Bears pass rush going. And as you kind of look at how they've utilized the personnel, especially in the post-Robert Quinn era, they seem to be trying everything they can of getting different guys involved in this Bears pass rush, and none of the bodies that they operate out there have been able to consistently do it. So, early in the season, right, your Bears rotation on the defensive line was your starters, Robert Quinn and Al-Quadin Muhammad at the defensive end spots, and then your 2 tackles, Justin Jones and Angelo Blackson, was your nose tackle. And we've sort of seen over time that certainly Angelo Blackson has seen his snap counts decrease significantly because he offers very little as a pass rusher. The first couple of games he's playing 45, 42, 40 snaps, starts declining to, 35, 30, 25. Last week against Atlanta, Angelo Blackson played 9 snaps. He has been more or less erased from this defensive line rotation. Maybe there's an injury thing going on there, but to me, it seems to be a reflection of how they feel about the quality of play they've been getting from him. Justin Jones has kind of been across the board defensive line-wise. He's been the one that has been playing the consistent number of snaps all season long. They want him out there. They're trying to get him to get things going from a pass rushing standpoint, and it's been, limited at best. It's kind of been the same guy we saw in LA. There was a hope that going from the Chargers to the Bears, bigger role, he would increase the production, and it just really hasn't happened to that full extent. The change we've seen at defensive tackle is that the newcomer that they brought in from the Minnesota Vikings at the start of the season, Armon Watts, has slowly replaced those Angelo Blackson snaps. Watts is not built like a true nose tackle. He and Justin Jones are both more 3 technique types that they'll rotate back and forth at the nose tackle, depending on the strong side and the weak side of the formation. But they're kind of going 2-3 technique, more pass rushing style of defensive tackles to try and get some pass rush going. And you don't really see Mike Pennell or Angelo Blackson play all that significant of a snap count. It's Jones and Watts that play the majority of them. And then Pennell plays, 15, maybe 20, and then Blackson's now down around 10 snaps. So that's kind of how the defensive tackle rotation is right now. And there aren't other defensive tackles under contract on the active roster right now to change that up. They're going with their 2 best pass rushers playing as much as they can, and neither one of them really producing much on the interior. On the edge, you have seen Al-Quadin Muhammad's snaps slowly decrease more and more and more. And so now he is now third in the rotation, where immediately after the Robert Quinn trade, he was playing the most snaps of any defensive end. And it was Travis Gibson that kind of absorbed Robert Quinn's snaps to play more and more. Now you're seeing Dominic Robinson played the most snaps against the Falcons, in part because Gibson got hurt, but Gibson and Robinson are clearly your two defensive end starters. And then it's Muhammad who kind of rotates in as the third, but he's not giving you much as a pass rusher, and you're not really seeing the production from Gibson and Robinson, even if you feel like there's still pass rushing upside there. Good energy, good hustle, good athletic ability, a couple of physical freaks at those positions, but it's not producing at this point. And I totally understand that, you want to play your young guys like Dominic Robinson and Gibson and Watts, because, no one else is working. But you also do need better from a defensive standpoint in order to produce as a defense. And so you're kind of left looking around saying, well, what else can they do from a personnel standpoint? They just brought in Taco Charlton, the former first-round pick who had spent time with Matt Eberflus on the Dallas Cowboys defensive line. He played, I think, 6 snaps against the Atlanta Falcons, essentially the same number of snaps that Kingsley Jonathan had been playing previously in that role, who the Bears waived because undrafted free agent, not really getting the job done there. Charlton offers some significant upside, right? He's been a first-round pick. He's had some production in the NFL, and that's first and foremost. I would like to see him get more opportunities here, and I'm glad that they seem to have identified that there is a pass rush issue by going out and getting Charlton and not just ignoring it and not making any changes on the defensive line. So I'm hopeful that they've properly identified this. I mean, based on all the scheme things they've tried, you can tell that they see this as a problem, and now they're adding a personnel change in there. They're clearly trying to do something about it, but I'd like to see them do more. I mean, it's just really, I think the biggest problem on this Bears defense is making everybody else worse. You look at your own practice squad, you've got Trevon Coley, the former Titans defensive tackle, who has some pass rush upside. I wouldn't mind seeing him get a shot in that rotation. They also have another defensive tackle, Jalen Holmes, you could try, and a defensive end, Jerry Green, who Eberflus had brought over from the Indianapolis Colts, a recent addition to the practice squad. I don't know, a young guy, probably not going to be any kind of home run hitter, but at this point, I'm kind of willing to rotate some guys in there and just see if they can give you a spark or something to help this pass rush. An interesting name that kind of flew under the radar, the Bears added a player to their practice squad a week or two ago named Sammis Reyes. He's a tight end, or has played tight end through most of his career, and the Bears are converting him to defensive end. So he's not going to be ready to go on the active roster anytime soon, learning a brand new position in the NFL, but he's like 6'5" or 6'6" and 240 some plus pounds. So they're trying to bulk him up a little bit and teach him how to be a pass rusher. And he said he's got, faith in Matt Eberflus and is embracing the position change altogether. It's not going to be the gem that comes out this year, but something to keep an eye on as a guy the Bears are clearly developing behind the scenes. I can't help but look around at other teams' practice squads though, much like how Taco Charlton came from another practice squad. There's a couple other names out there that I'd consider kicking the tires on that I don't think the Bears will, because I think they looked at the group and said, between Charlton and these guys, they took Taco. But there's still some other names out there that I would keep an eye on as possibilities here. Devon Kennard from the Baltimore Ravens practice squad. He was with the Giants. He's more of a 3-4 outside linebacker, but pass rushers are pass rushers. I think he can put his hand in the dirt and do it as a rotational pass rush guy. He's never been, a huge sack production guy, but he's got some experience and some track record under his belt. He's gotten some sacks. He can be a decent pass rusher. Be worth kicking the tires on if you ask me. Otherwise, former Bear Sam Kamara, who was an undrafted free agent who was here in the Nagy regime. If there's enough familiarity with him and no different coaching staff, but some teammates here and some tape on him from in the building, he's a name to keep an eye on. And then I'll throw out another high draft pick, Takaris McKinley, now with the Dallas Cowboys practice squad. I want to say he was a Falcons first round pick, and I think he'd spent some time with the Cleveland Browns as well. I want to say there was some off the field trouble or something with him, but he's on a practice squad. He was a highly touted prospect coming out, a real athletic freak. And the Bears just need more of that, right? Give me somebody who's got some upside there, and a guy like Takk McKinley. See if you can rejuvenate some of the optimism and potential there was from him coming out of the draft. You got options here. Most hopeful for Taco Charlton to do something, but if not, give me one of the guys on your own practice squad or another practice squad. Keep rotating him in there, and no need to you're not obligated to give Al-Quadin Muhammad snaps. You're not obligated to play Armon Watts or Justin Jones. So just give me some better pass rushers, and I think it can go a long way towards making the defense as a whole that much better. We'll see what the pass rush has in store this week against the New York Jets. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you're keeping up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis, because tomorrow we will have our crossover Thursday, Locked On Bears, Locked On Jets. We'll kind of get the preview. What's going on with Zach Wilson? Will he start? Will he not? The Jets seem like a bit of a dumpster fire there, but a pretty good team around the quarterback position, a very good defense, and an otherwise pretty solid supporting cast on offense. So that'll be our Bears-Jets preview. We're going to take Friday off this week for the Thanksgiving holiday because we record these podcasts usually a day ahead here. So I'll record Thanksgiving's Thursday podcast on Wednesday and then not record one on Thursday for Friday for the holiday. I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving if that's something you participate in, and get together with family and have a good time and be thankful for so many different things this year. I'm thankful for you tuning into this Locked On Bears podcast. I'm thankful to have a Chicago Bears season to talk about, even when the team has lost 4 games in a row, because when we're in the offseason, man, we're always we would easily take 4 losses in a row just to have football on our TVs on Sundays. Like I'd rather have 4 losses in a row than no Bears games on at all. So I'm thankful for having some games to talk about here. I'm thankful for you tuning into the podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, or on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. So fill up, get a nice full stomach this week, and then come on back on Monday for a recap of whatever happens in Bears Jets. And of course, you got to come on back for your next opportunity to bear down.